Welcome to the class. Today we are going to look at some intricacies of sentences that require our attention. These intricacies of English sentences make a sentence a complex one, but a clearer understanding, as I have been pointing it out to you, makes them look very simple. It has dramatic impact on improving your speech as well as writing. I'm sure you're working on your reading and you have observed impact of your reading on these aspects of English sentences so far. Let's look at some of those intricacies in little bit more details. And as it is obvious to you, these intricacies only need our attention. So in particular, we are going to talk about some specific aspects of embedded clause, something about a complex sentence, because embedded clause can only be part of a complex sentence, and it is embedded clause that makes a sentence complex. And to be more particular, we are going to be talking about that clause in English sentences. There are sentences that are introduced with that clause, and we are going to look at some of the detailed descriptions of these types of sentences in English. As we know, sentences have two parts: subjects and predicates. One sentence has one subject and one predicate. Within a predicate, we have a verb as the most crucial element. Crucial because the number of objects from 0 to 2 is dependent upon the nature of the verb, and adjuncts in a sentence say something about verbs, give us additional information about verbs. So we can also say there are two parts, subjects and verbs. That makes a sentence a sentence. So the combination of a combination of subject and predicate, connecting the two with agreement, makes a sentence. When we have an embedded clause, when we have an additional sentence as an object of the verb in the predicate, that is the situation when the sentence becomes a complex one. So, in order to discuss this embedded clause, which today we want to say that clause, in the sense that a sentence, a clause that begins with that as an element in the sentence, we are going to talk about those sentences. Before that, we want to look at the idea of subject and object. We know that subject is an independent part of sentence, and objects in a sentence are contingent upon verbs. So, very simply, there are several elements, several types of subjects in a sentence. They are, sometimes we don't need to articulate a subject. Such sentences are called imperative sentences. Like when we say, sit down, please. We know this is a sentence, this has a subject, the second person pronoun is the subject of this sentence, that is you, Second person pronoun is the subject of this sentence. The second person pronoun is you, and it is not articulated. So, this type of sentence does not have an overt subject. Sometimes when we have a sentence like this, we use it as a subject in the sentence. This it is technically, it is called expletive because this is semantically vacuous. This has no meaning and it comes just to fill the subject position. Because in English, subject must be overtly present. Remember, in the two sentences with these two examples, I am talking about two different things. I am telling you, I am giving you a type of sentence which makes the point that we must have a subject in English sentence overtly present. And therefore, when there is no apparent subject, we need to insert a vacuous element, a meaningless element, or an element that becomes meaningless in the sentence just to fulfill the requirement of a subject. Such subjects are it type of subjects. When we say sentences like it is raining, it is warm, it is cold, or their type of sentence. When we say there are many students in the class. Look at it. It's a long sentence, but the subject of this sentence has zero meaning. So these types of subjects are called expletive subjects. I just give you an example of an imperative sentence where I said subject is not articulated. True. Imperative sentences do not have overt subjects across languages, and English is no exception to that. So look at how we learn language, how understanding computation of different elements of language in our mind helps us understand intricacies of language that can help us draw from how things work in our subconscious. And once we pay attention to them, we become clearer and clearer about very intricate details of language, and that has impact on our learning. So, sentence number one, subject not overtly present, because it falls in line with all types of imperative sentences of all the languages of the world, where imperative sentences do not allow subjects because it is obvious that the subject of an imperative sentence can only be second person pronoun. So, when it is so obvious, we don't need to articulate it. That follows from the principle of economy that human mind applies in language. However, there is a rule in English which says a sentence must have a subject. So, to fulfill that, so imperative sentences already have a subject, it's just that it is just not apparent, it is just not overtly present. Then there are sentences which do not seem to have apparent subjects. So to fill the gap, we bring in elements which leave their literal meanings aside and become subjects of types of sentences. They are called expletives. And then we have simple sentences that you have seen. Raju likes pizza. I'm using these sentences out of the context to make the point. And you can use your own sentence, you can practice with your own sentences, and you can check every sentence that you write and speak whether these things apply to those sentences or not, and then see what kind of confidence they give you to your own understanding of intricacies of language, underlying intricacies of language, which are kind of apparent, but we need to make it more apparent by paying a little bit attention to that. So we have these types of subjects. So basically, here I am giving you examples of 3 different types of subjects of a sentence, which they are just a noun as a subject, a noun as a subject which has no meaning, and you, an apparent subject which is not articulated. Today, I am going to talk about a subject, another type of subject, which is kind of a whole sentence, and then you have something as a predicate. I'm going to discuss that in a minute with you in details. Talking about objects, we have seen so far we have seen only a noun phrase becoming an object of a verb. When we say, again taking my favorite sentence because it is just so simple, or you can say Raju reads a story before bedtime. Now, the reason why I am giving you these Raju reads a story before bedtime, the reason why I am giving you these sentences is both pizza and a story as objects in these 2 sentences are not just nouns, rather they are noun phrases. So we have mostly paid attention to objects that are noun phrases. Sometimes an infinitive clause, to go type of a clause, becomes an object of a sentence. A very simple sentence like, I want to go. This is not a noun. Or we have a sentences like, we have sentence objects like, I want him to go. This is not a nominal object. So this is a type of object which are called infinitival. And then we are going to introduce objects that are a full sentence which begins with that. So to understand that clause in the context of subject and object, we need to just pay attention to couple of types of subjects and couple of types of objects in a sentence in English. Again, remember, so far I have only discussed 2 things, and things that we already know. We know that every sentence will have subject and verb and verbs, objects of verbs. So today I am only discussing with you couple of types of subjects and couple of types of objects. Some of these things we have already seen, and we haven't paid attention to these things in the order that I am presenting them to you today. So look at this. Raju likes pizza, an example of a canonical simple sentence, a very good looking, obedient, simple sentence. And remember, I am talking about a sentence, I am talking about certain intricacies of sentence, therefore I am talking about these sentences out of the context, just so that I could retain your attention to the bare point that I am trying to make. I want money. So pizza, money, I want peace. These are plain noun phrases as objects of the verb, their respective verbs like, want. Now, here is the sentence where we have a verb wish and we have the object that I had a lot of money. This is a whole sentence. This is the object of the verb wish. So, for the purpose of sentence, this is still subject, verb and object. It is just that as an object, we have a sentence which is a that clause. That's all where I need your attention. Now, that clause, in that clause, that is called in short a comp or a complementizer, because you don't need to memorize this term, you just need to understand. Remember, this object is also a complement of this verb, and this element that is introducing the whole sentence, introducing the whole complement. Therefore, we call it either a that clause or we call this particular element a complementizer. Nothing complex about it. We can drop these complementizers when we have a full finite sentence, and I'll explain that finite sentence to you. We can make this that, as you see here in this sentence, optional. We can also say, I wish I had a lot of money. It is optional only in the sense that we don't articulate it. It stays there because it is introducing a finite clause. John knows that Peter likes Mary. Again, the verb know has this whole sentence, Peter likes Mary, is the object of this verb, and it is this complementizer, that, which is introducing this whole sentence, and therefore this is called a that clause. If we drop that, we can simply have John knows Peter likes Mary, and in this case we know that we are just not articulating this that. So here are some examples of non-finite clause versus finite clauses. So what does non-finite clause mean? So non-finite clause simply means a sentence which does not have a tense in it. A sentence which does not have a tense in it. Remember, without a tense, there are many sentences, but certain clauses without a tense will not stand on their own. Thus they can only be part of a bigger matrix sentence. So we are talking about, with the help of these things, we are talking about whenever we are saying embedded clause, we mean a clause embedded in a matrix sentence. That is, a clause embedded as an object of another sentence which is known as matrix sentence. So when we say I want to go, what is the matrix sentence? The matrix sentence is this whole thing. An embedded sentence is this. This is embedded sentence, and this whole thing is a matrix sentence. This whole thing is matrix sentence, and this is embedded sentence. Now, we will understand the non-finite clauses, or what is non-finite about clause, when we look at finite clauses in little bit more details. So I come back to this point in a minute. Look at this. Here are examples of finite clauses. I believe that he is innocent. Look at this. This sentence, he is innocent, is a complete sentence by itself because it has a subject, it has tense, or it has a predicate, complete. She said that she can speak 3 languages. I wonder what her name is. Could you tell me if the doctor is available? When you look at embedded clauses in all these examples, you will see that they have their own tense on it. And as a matter of coincidence, in all these cases, they are present tense, and present tense. So whenever a clause, an embedded clause, has its own tense, that's called a finite clause. And whenever an embedded clause does not have its tense, that is called non-finite clause. So look at this. This is just an infinitive, to go. So it's a non-finite clause. We want him to go. Don't we speak these kinds of sentences all the time? I want him to go. This has no tense. So what is the difference between I want to go and I want him to go? I want to go is actually I want I to go. But when the subject, remember, look at this. This is something additional that I am explaining to you, and this is interesting to see. I want I to go. Just as we say, I want him to go. So whenever the subject of the matrix clause and the subject of the embedded clause, they refer to the same individual, same entity, then the subject of the embedded clause can be dropped. And therefore it can become 0. But in this case, I want him to go, the subject of the matrix clause is I and the subject of the embedded clause is him. Therefore, they don't match. We are talking about 2 different types of individuals, and therefore him must remain present in that. Only then the meaning becomes clearer. So I want him to go, I want her to go, I want them to go, I want them to come. All those sentences are pretty simple sentences, but the important thing to look at is they are all clauses. They are all non-finite clauses as an object to the verb in the matrix sentence, like want in these cases, like in the third one. Look at this. This is another interesting thing. What is the I would like what? Like is the matrix verb. It's a transitive verb. You would like what? I would like to know. That should be over. This is the I would like to know. To know as an infinitive satisfies the requirement of the matrix verb like, and it has an object. But to know, in the case of know is also a transitive verb. So within this matrix, within this clause, to know needs, you need to know what is a transitive verb and it needs an object too. So, and the object here is need to know what he did the best. Another embedded clause is the object of this verb to know, and this whole thing is the object of the verb like. So remember, and please see, this is an example of embedding twice. This is an example of embedding within an embedded clause. Remember again, embedding within an embedded clause. These things have a specific terms, and these things can be explained through these things can be explained as examples of lot of intricate computation of human mind. Just to give you the name for reference, this kind of thing is called recursion, which is a very unique and specific property of human language, and in turn it is also referring to a very specific capacity of human mind. Nonetheless, we move to our main point. So we see that verbs, there are subjects in sentences, there are verbs, and the verbs can take larger objects, a sentential object, a sentence as object, and those sentences, when they are finite, then they are called finite clauses, and when they are non-finite, they are called non-finite clauses. Thus, we see examples of some of the objects, some of the specific types of objects, and particularly that clause as the object of certain verbs. We'll look at more examples, but now we want to look at some of the examples of that clause as subjects. But before that, I would like you to see that these types of examples are not complex sentences. We have been looking at, they are all complex sentences. I want to go is a complex sentence because it has go, a want has a non-finite clause embedded as its object. I want him to go, another non-finite clause, him to go is the object of the verb want. I would like to know what he did best. Here, like is the transitive verb which needs an object, which is to know, and to know is also a transitive verb, it needs an object which is what he did the best. So to know what he did the best is the object of the verb like. So these are, so when an embedded clause is the object of the verb, only such cases are called complex sentences. Raju likes pizza and Ramu likes sandwich is not an example of a complex sentence. So, not a complex sentence. Raju likes pizza and Ramu sandwich. This verb like is for both the coordinated sentences. So, not a complex sentence. This is an example of a coordinate sentence. So, now when we look at that clause as the subject of the sentence, is that an example of a complex clause? No. That clause, the first thing that we need to keep in mind, that clause may occur as the subject of a sentence too, but it doesn't make a sentence a complex one. It doesn't make a sentence a complex one. A sentence, it becomes the subject of the sentence, but doesn't make a sentence complex. This is a very crucial point, and yet at the same time, I am trying to show you another uses of that type of clause. So here are some of the examples. Look at this. And here I am trying to put them in bold. That Mary would forget John so quickly was rather a shock. So this is a predicate and this is a subject. That Raju delivered a good lecture pleased Ramu. This is a predicate where pleased is the verb, Ramu is the object of the verb, but this whole thing is the subject of this sentence. You can do a substitution test for this. You can remove the whole thing and supply a simple subject there, and still it will be a good sentence. We can even remove these things with it. It was rather a shock. it pleased Ramu. So there is not much to say. Just look at the sentence. You will see this whole thing is the subject of the sentence in these two sentences. Now, I want to show you what we do further with these things. The fact that she did not recognize him was rather a shock. Now, when you look at this sentence, sometimes, so that she did not recognize him, this is a predicate, this is the subject, the fact, and that she did not recognize him is modifying this noun. So, in this case, we don't have that clause as the subject of the sentence. The subject is the fact, only this much is the subject, and this that clause is modifying that subject, and this is the predicate. That clause is a subject only in these two sentences 1 and 2, not in 3 and 4, or definitely not in 5 and 6. What happens? The idea that the leader idea is the subject of this sentence, only this much. That the leader should know everything is the clause which is modifying this idea, and is unacceptable is the predicate of the sentence. So, with these things, I am trying to simplify a big looking sentence, a complicated looking sentence to you, and if you pay attention, your understanding of subject, your understanding of predicate, your understanding of a verb in the predicate, and your understanding of what else comes within the predicate helps you uncomplicate these complex sentences and still try to understand intricacies of a sentence for you to make this clearer to you, so that when you speak, you know everything about these things. Look at the sentence, another type of sentence. It surprised me that he was still in bed. Now, here it is co-indexed with this whole thing, but this is the whole sentence, but that he was in the bed is basically pushed towards the right, and in this sentence we can say we have a subject, we have a verb, and we have indirect object, and we have an direct object. So, she made it clear that she would not accept the proposal. Here, it again replaces this thing. Moving ahead, so the point on this slide that I am trying to make is only 1 and 2 are examples of hold that clause as the subject of the sentence. There are certain things in English, like the idea, the belief, the fact. We use these things to reduce the heavy impact of a subject, and we make, instead of using that clause as the big subject, we try to minimize the impact of that clause on these elements. So, instead of saying that she did not recognize him was rather a shock, we say the fact that she did not recognize him was a shock. So, in this case, the fact becomes the subject of the sentence. That's all is the purpose of these 3 elements in English. Now, I take you back to objects one more time. And in this case, we are going to talk about verbs which require two objects. And when the second one is a that clause. So look at this. Some verbs, and you know there is a handful of verbs in English. I'm just giving you some. Tell, inform, advise, assure, convince, remind, promise, teach. These are just a few verbs which take two objects. So look at this. He told us that it would take a long time. Keep in mind, tell is a verb which takes two objects. Us is one, and this whole thing is the second object. So us is indirect object, this is a direct object. The principal convinced, this is also a verb which needs two objects. Everyone is indirect object, and that the course would be good for the class is the direct object. She convinced me that I was wrong. Here is the verb convince, takes two objects, me, indirect object, and that I was wrong is direct object. The pilot informed the passengers that the weather was not good. Direct object, sorry, indirect object, direct object. So, that clause can also be used as an object of ditransitive verb. And you have seen that here, surprise. So, this is the subject, surprise is the verb, me is the object, that is indirect object, and that he was still in bed is direct object. Make is another type of a sentence. So, just wanted to make it clear to you. Now, look at some of the examples. When we have it's a specific feature of indirect object of a ditransitive verb that is, you see, we can use a ditransitive verb in two ways. Indirect objects in ditransitive verbs in two ways. Look at this sentence. This is fine. He emailed his response quickly. It's a good sentence. He emailed quickly his response. Not a very good sentence, because quickly should be at the end of the sentence, but still a okay, acceptable sentence. He emailed his response to us. This is a good sentence, because to us, whenever we have indirect object with to, it has to, direct object has to precede and indirect object has to follow. But when it is not used with a preposition in English, it can precede the direct object. He emailed us his response. He emailed us his response. But if we want to say, if he emailed to us his response, is not a good sentence. So the point in this five examples that we are trying to make is, the moment this indirect object with to cannot be preceding the direct object, whereas an adverb can precede the direct object in these kinds of a sentence. So look at the examples where we have larger that clause type of sentence as direct object. So he informed that he had an urgent meeting to attend quickly. is not a good sentence. He informed is not a good sentence. He informed quickly that he had an urgent meeting to attend. This is also not a good sentence, because the ungrammaticality of these sentences is not because of quickly, because of the location of the quickly, but because it has an indirect object missing in these two sentences, in 1 and 2. He informed that he had an urgent meeting to us he informed that he has an urgent meeting to attend to us. He informed us that he had an urgent meeting to attend. This is a good sentence. Number 4 is a good sentence because it has indirect object and direct object both. This is an indirect object, and this whole that clause is a direct object. He informed to us, indirect object, and this whole thing is direct object. So why is this number 3 ungrammatical on this slide? And what is the difference between the position of indirect object and direct object between these sentences? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So why look at number 5. Number 5 was ungrammatical here because to us, that is an indirect object with preposition cannot precede the direct object. But when we have a direct object with that clause, that is a heavy direct object, and by heavy we simply mean a full sentence as direct object. In that case, the indirect object with preposition can precede, because heavy elements are only stacked towards the end in English sentences. So, we have talked about quite a few things about that clause. We have talked about that clause in the context of indirect object, direct object, and also as subjects. We have talked about certain restrictions on them, and sometimes when these restrictions are relaxed, we talked that a coordinated sentence is not a complex sentence. That clause in the subject position is also not a complex sentence. That clause makes a sentence a complex one only when it becomes the object of the sentence. And we have seen that sometimes we can have embedding within an embedded sentence, and we can have further embedding, and such a thing is called recursion. In both, moreover, the point that we are trying to make, that in both subject and object positions, we can have a sentence, a full sentence at that clause, a complementizer clause, and still the sentence remains just this one. So we can nicely and convincingly say that a complex sentence is also an example of essentially a simple sentence. To be able to understand this much, we need to go through these examples carefully. And I invite you to look at these examples carefully, to read things in more details, to read text, find your own examples of that, and see whether these things are applicable or not. And they will equip you with better understanding of a complex sentence for better uses. When we understand subject, verb, and object, when we understand subject and object, when we understand objects as complements of verbs, these things can help us understand larger stuff in as the intricate stuff in the language. They also help us understand very complex things as simple computation in human mind. Looking forward to a fruitful discussion with you on these things until we talk about something new. Thank you so much.